your introduction on.
Okay. Welcome everybody to this DoorGrow masterclass with Joe Oliveri. And so we're going to be talking about building property management processes. And Joe is a Disney trained. I have a book by Disney. I haven't been able to read it yet, but I know Disney is big on systems and processes. And the book's called Be Our Guest. And Joe is trained by Disney in their processes and their systems. Yeah. And she is an Aussie. She's in Australia and she coaches and consults a lot of property managers in that neck of the woods and in the US in helping them with processes. And her husband, Stacy Pittman, also manage a software called Flusos that is this really cool almost like Visio flowchart software, and Process Street had a baby. And so it allows you to visually see processes and create them, which makes it really easy for your team to update them and understand them. And so we actually use this internally at DoorGrow. We had our own sort of branch of this called DoorGrow Flow. And so we've kind of joined forces on this. And so and she's written some books and done a lot of cool stuff. She's a consummate expert in the area of property management. So people are aware property management in Australia is a much more seasoned thing. I don't know that they have all the cool bells and whistles and technology that we have over here. Probably not, but they've been at it a lot longer. And something like somewhere around maybe like 80% of single family residential rentals in Australia are professionally managed by a property manager. Here in the US, it's only like 30%. So they have a much stronger awareness of property management over there than we do here in the States. And but that also means there's a lot of opportunity here in the US and there's no scarcity in growing a company. So Joe is also just generally an amazing, kind, wonderful human being and a friend. And so I'm excited to introduce all of you to her. Take it away, Joe. And you're welcome to say anything else. This is your opportunity. You need to brag about yourself if I missed anything. So
Oh, no, thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. And I've actually got a couple of tears in my eyes from that. So thank you. Really lovely. And I'm really excited to be here today. It is 6 a.m. in the morning here in Brisbane. So hence why it's, all dark outside. But I've been really looking forward to this opportunity to share with everyone, how to create automated flows in property management. So thanks, Jason and Sarah, for having me on. It's really special and really excited to be here. So as we kind of like work through today, what I'm going to be sharing with you is understanding how to create workflows. And I want you to understand that, workflows are so complex. Once they're in your business, they make your business simple to manage and operate and deliver a service, but actually creating them is very complex. So at the end of today, I'm not expecting you to be able to sit down and say, I can now write a workflow, but you will have understanding around that workflow. And the great thing about property management is founded on tasking. Everything we do starts in a task, and every one of our tasks has a lot of actions and steps along the way. And everything we do in property management is about timelines for completing those actions and steps, and then ultimately delivering on the end result of the task that we're doing. So out of all the industries in the world, I believe that property management is the one that should be so easy to run on automated workflows, yet we're still not quite understanding it. So hopefully at the end of today, you will have a greater understanding of how to create and implement workflows and use them day to day in your business operations. So it's how you do day to day, every day in the business of property management. So let's get started. So I believe that everything we do in property management is founded on policy. But to understand policy, we need to know what goes into policy. So I've broken it down into all of the different elements of creating policy. And policy is the foundation, whereas these other elements can be your like cornerstones or keystones and crossbars of your business. It's going to hold your business strong and make sure that, every day what you do, you're compliant. There is completion in all the tasks that you do. You're not going back and saying, how did we forget to do that? How did we miss that? And there is consistency. It's important to have consistency in property management. And I believe we also create precision in decision when we've got everything we do founded on policy. So let's just break that down a bit. The first one is protocol, and that's really about legislation. Procedures is about your technology, your systems, your resources that you use, whatever that might be, that forms part of your procedures. Your politeness is your culture and ethics that brings about the kindness and care that we should be demonstrating in property management. I've just been working in an office in Sydney for the last month, and I was really confronted with the anger of the property managers towards the clients. And I just thought this all comes from a place of kind of like backpedaling in everything that we do, whereas we should always be forward pedaling, and we should be the ones who, know exactly where we're at. So when you've got great culture and ethics, you've got that politeness in your business. And of course, a promise is why people choose your brand, your company, to engage, to manage their properties or to rent through. So your promise becomes your client results and your service experience, whereas your practice is your benchmarks. It's the business and individual performance indicators. So your BPI and your IPI. It's very important that you have individual performance indicators for every team member. Your process becomes your consistency, or what I call your roadmap or navigation system for your business. And your principles, really important, is how you measure quality control and your accountability. Accountability is very, very important, as in all of these things. And then there's your people. So it's role responsibility, task allocation, and alignment of those people, and your preciseness, which is your compliance and completion. So that's a bit of an understanding of, what is required when you're thinking about your workflows and every element or cornerstone or keystone of those workflows. So to understand policy, it is your business foundation, and every task must be founded upon the guidelines and requirements of legislation. But it's not just legislation, there's other things involved. But an example of that, if you like, is we don't do any work unless we've got a contract, and that is our appointment in writing. So that's an example of legislation. But what we do after we get that contract in writing to work on behalf of that client or to place that tenant in a property becomes the policy that we create. So we interpret policy as in legislation and all the, the legal requirements into our own policy. And this is what I believe, business should look like. Business to me is the precision of cogs all moving together. And when we have those cogs all built and moving together, then we're not going to have, we hear a lot of people say, I'm putting out bushfires today, or, like I'm stomping out great kind of like flare-ups and things like that. I believe that's when the cogs are not working together. So when they're not working together, they're grinding and they're creating, sparks and all sorts of things that are going on. So I encourage you, when you look at your business, to think of it like cogs. And when you're creating policy and promise and protocol, all of those cogs need to interlink and start working together. When you break it down, this is like the main cog. So policy is like your founding cog. And sorry with all my hand actions, that's the Italian in me. So policy is like your main cog, and then you start building out. So create a big whiteboard, get your whiteboard out and start looking at your cogs and seeing how they all interact with each other. And is there anything that is kind of going to butt or jam or create that friction because they're not working together? Uh, so if I look at businesses, and I do a lot of prognosis in business, I go in and have a look at business operations to see, why aren't they advancing? Why are they constantly like grinding and not getting, further ahead? And what I say, I'm a very visual person, is I see that they're telling me that, yes, we've got policy, we've got procedure, but it's all a mishmash in the background. Nothing works together. So you might feel that, yes, I've got policy. Yes, I've got a process, but it's not built to actually work together and spin your business towards the ultimate success and viability and profitability and relevance for your clients. I also see this in businesses. Now, this is what I call island management. So everyone has their own way of doing things. It's like, I've always done it this way, and I'll continue to do it this way. And this is just the way I do things. But the cogs are not working together. So you're not moving forward. Everyone becomes their own way of doing business, and the business will have mistakes. There will be things that fall through the gaps. There will be inconsistency, and there'll be non-completion and non-compliance, which is why we have a lot of liability and risk and, clients who feel that we're just not delivering on promise. So that's a bit of an overview of cogs. And this is how you want your cogs to be. There are many, many cogs working at once. Are your cogs all grinding and moving and just, in perfect synchronicity together? So let's talk a little bit about legislation, because legislation to me is grey. And policy actually produces the grey and white. And I believe that legislation is grey because it gives lawyers jobs. They interpret policy into what they believe it might be, and hence, why we end up in court and why we need lawyers. Whereas if we interpret what policy really states, and then in our interpretation, we create policy within our company and process and protocol and things around it, then we've got evidence as to how we are managing that policy. So we put the black and white into policy. But to understand policy is to understand, what forms policies. So business policies are the guidelines formulated by an organization to govern its actions. Now, an organization in our case is our property management business. That's our organization. And they define the limits and scope within decisions made by subordinates, which is the team. It gives them the confidence and courage to make decision because we've created policy around it. Now, a great example of this is property managers' reluctance to do a job because they're waiting on the owner of the property to give them instruction. When in our contract with the owner, our management agreement, it will state we are to act in the best interests of the client. And so in the absence of instructions, we act in the best interest. If we don't act in the best interest, we are actually in breach of the contract we have with them. But what I hear a lot of property managers say is, no, I'm waiting for the owner to give me instructions. An example of this is maintenance. We prolong maintenance. Excuse me, I've got morning voice. We prolong maintenance because we're waiting for the owner to give us instructions, where in the management agreement, it states that we can, just complete maintenance up to a certain limit. And if it is maintenance that requires urgent work, then we have to mitigate any loss to the client by organizing that maintenance. Whereas a lot of property managers will say, no, 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 I was waiting for the owner. The other thing is when we're processing applications. Now, when we're processing applications, the work involved in applications is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal cost to the business in processing those applications. And what we see is property managers sitting on a very good application, waiting for the owner to give them, instruction as to whether to accept or reject the application. When, we should know what the owner's instructions are prior to us even processing the applications. We should also advise the owner that in the absence of your instructions, if we can't reach you, this is what we will do on your behalf, because we can go to all those great lengths of, showing property, processing applications, and then finding the cream of the crop. And we can't get a hold of the owner and we lose that best applicant. So the property remains vacant. The owner's not earning money. We're not earning money as the managing agents. And we're spending all of this time showing the property again and reprocessing applications. So it's a very good example of, why policy and protocol is important, and helping your team to make decisions out of confidence, because that is our policy. And that is what we've communicated and articulated to our clients when we first sign them up. And then again, prior to a certain event taking place, like a vacant property.
So Joe, I'm curious. So let's ask. So everybody here, by show of hands, how many of you have some sort of, spend level that you are allowed and authorized to in your agreements with your owners to be able to go ahead and just take care of stuff? Most everybody, which is good. Good job. Anybody lacking that? You're going to add this to your agreements? All right. They don't want to raise their hands, but okay. And then Joe, in the beginning, you're showing all these images of gears. Could you give an example of what the differences between some of these scenarios might be? Where the cogs are not, like where the cogs are siloed or the cogs are, could you explain that?
Yes, certainly. So when I see silo cogs, it's typically when you go into an office and you've got property managers with, many years, or, 5 years or 3 years of experience. Their experience determines how they will do things. So they'll go into an office and say, I've always done it this way, and I'll continue to do it this way because I feel comfortable doing it this way. They completely disregard how the company might be doing a certain task, as in processing a tenancy renewal or processing an application. For example, a tenancy renewal, your company might have a policy that we call the owners to discuss the renewal options. We call the owner to discuss what the property could achieve in rent. We call the owner to discuss the current tenant's care of the property and performance in the property. And we make recommendations to the owner and then ask for their instructions as to whether they'd like to offer the tenants a renewal or not, based on our recommendations. A lot of property managers will follow their own way of doing that and saying, I just like to send an email to the owners. And they don't have that upfront discussion. So an upfront discussion is very important. If you say to the owner, what we do is we call you to discuss your options in renewing a property. It's also very, very good customer interfacing time and communication time and relationship building time. But you've got a property manager who will say, no, I don't do it that way. You also might have a policy where you'll say, in the absence of the owner's instructions, if the owners don't instruct us in renewing that tenancy or rejecting a renewal on the tenancy because of, our recommendations, we act on the owner's behalf. Just go ahead and renew for the recommended period and rental rate. A lot of property managers will sit back and say, no, I'm not comfortable doing that. I've done that before in other companies and I got into trouble for doing it. And I will wait for the owners to advise me on what they would want me to do. So, then what happens is we've got a lot of tenancies fall into periodic, and a lot of owners who become very dissatisfied because they were promised it in the absence of their instructions, you would go ahead and act. And you've got a property manager who said, no, I'm not comfortable doing that. So whatever your policy is and whatever you articulate and promise to your clients, they expect you to do. So you need to have confidence and faith in policy, and your team need to follow it. So that's an example of a team working in silo cogs. An
Yeah.
example of the mishmash cogs is everyone who is very reactive to situations. So they don't follow timelines in the business. They react to the loudest owner or the loudest tenant,
Mm.
and they are doing things in accordance with what that client wants or demands out of fear of doing the wrong thing, or out of fear of, that person who they love very much not liking them. So what they're doing is they're not focusing on any one task. Everyone is just jumping in and responding to whatever is thrown at them at that time and doing
Mm.
whatever they need to do to resolve it, regardless of whether it's breaching policy or anything, any promise. Um, and that's what we see in a lot of companies where we hear that, like we're constantly putting out bushfires. That is a reactive company, and that is a mishmash of cogs. No one knows how to kind of like just focus on the right things.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's scenarios in the former you had mentioned. It could be in departmental businesses where the departments aren't really communicating effectively. There's, the processes and policies aren't really connected between departments. So anyone ever had a business where you're in a business where one department's kind of fighting with the other, like sales and fulfillment sometimes, right? That is a common challenge. Or in the latter scenario that you're talking about, um, where there's kind of the mismatch, as you call it, or it's kind of get messy. It's sometimes if you have team members that think they need to hi ho silver and react quickly because a tenant was really angry with them on the phone, or an owner was really upset, and so now they need to break policy or not follow the procedures and like do things differently because they're afraid of being disliked or afraid of somebody's anger or whatever, right? And so then it starts to cause chaos in the business, because once you break a process, then there's more failures that tend to happen. So okay. Yeah, thank you.
Exactly. Like a common thing that we see with property managers is their sympathy towards tenants if the tenants can't pay the rent. So there's, very stringent guidelines on what to do should a tenant be delinquent or fall into arrears, whereas property managers tend to buy into the sad story that a tenant might share. And
Mm.
so as a result, they're not issuing notices as and when they should. And then we become that kind of like mishmash of reaction and falling over each other, or like someone saying it's not my job, I'm not going to do that, that person's not around at the moment, and everything falls into the abyss because no one's not there to manage it. So when you
This
have
may
that
be a
abyss.
silly question, Joe, but is there different roles in property management when it comes to processes where sociopaths would be better than empaths then? Or because it sounds like there's this balance between like being too empathetic and too caring, and then and then also the flip side of like being too cold. And property managers, I think their job more so than the owners is they need to be completely immune to the tenant stories and BS and excuses. Whereas a lot of owners that they find that really difficult to do, which is why they get a property manager.
Yes,
So how
yeah.
do we find that balance? I guess I don't know.
Yeah, and that's such a good question because a lot of property managers are tenants themselves. I'd love to do a survey to see what
Mm,
percentage of property managers are tenants. And so they take the side of the tenant, not understanding that, the owner's got mortgage and rates and all sorts of things to pay
yeah.
on the property. So they tend to kind of like jump in on that side and make poor decisions as a result. And those poor decisions escalate to create problems. So it is having policy and ensuring that your team understand policy and feel confidence in policy to make sure that they don't buy into the sad stories. And
Ooh,
to me, it's I've shared this before. It's like a doctor. You might know your doctor your entire life, and the doctor, regardless of the situation, shares exactly what's going on. Here's what's going on, and here's what we need to do. And we need that same thing in property management. Here's what's going on. You can't pay your rent. You're going to fall further into arrears, which is going to cause a problem for you and the owner. So here's some things you can do. There are community groups that can assist whilst you're going through this situation, or you simply can't afford this rent. So let's get you out of this property and into something you can afford. But to turn a blind eye to this is not helping anyone. And I think it's, not having that policy backing you that creates the reactive and the wrong decision making and the giving an inch that becomes a mile, and problems are created. So policy is, again, it's the foundation of your business, and it's where confidence comes, and we remove chaos when we've got strong policy.
got it.
So
So
yeah,
when hiring Joe property managers, like people that are going to be interacting either with tenants or with owners, does it then make sense to ask them if they're renters and what their perception is of how a property management business fits into that? Because that definitely could skew their role in the job, I would imagine.
I definitely think we should find out a little bit about their background.
Hmm.
Um, and like find out if they're even interested in investing in property. I used to encourage my team to invest in property, so they
Yeah.
understood, and I was always an investor. I've been a renter. When I was living in California just before the pandemic, I had to rent. Um, like it's important that we understand, where everyone stands,
Yeah.
um, but we have that understanding through policy. It's why policy is, so critical in every business. And for that policy to be something that can be clearly articulated through what I call the cornerstones or the keystones, the preciseness, the politeness, the the process and all of that. And that's where you convert perception on your business to reality. This is the reality of the business. It's why we can go to Disney and say, we know exactly what to expect because there is preciseness there because of all their, policy. We know that we, can go to Disney and pay all that money for the opportunity to stand in a line for 2 hours to get on a ride. We know that before we go. We don't go there and stand and complain that I've just spent all of this money. So, it's very important. It's why we talk so much about policy and why it's important, but don't make legislation your policy. The key here is
Right.
you have to interpret legislation into your own policy and all of those other elements of creating policy.
So the property management businesses need their own policy book. They need their own set of rules. And this is outside of processes and maybe even outside of just what's in their agreements. I imagine their agreements with tenants and owners include a lot of policy, but they probably should have the policy defined outside of that, which then is what helps to create the agreement. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So,
Mm,
your policy might say that like we will approve an applicant in the absence of your instructions. So the protocol is that when we've got an application that we believe is one that we can present to the owner, if the team can't reach the owner to get a decision, our protocol is that we give the owner 24 hours to reach back to us. If we don't hear from the owner within 24 hours, we will accept that applicant on their behalf. So that becomes the protocol, which protocol is if this, then that. So
Got
the
it.
team aren't left floundering. If we've got a water heater that breaks down over a weekend, then we've got a tenant who, if it's in the middle of winter and freezing, needs hot water, and we can't get someone out, then it's if this, then that. If the tenant needs hot water and we can't get it replaced and we can't reach the owners, then we will organise temporary accommodation. So the team aren't fearful of making a decision, and the owners understand that if we can't reach them, then this is what we are to do. For the tenants, if the tenant can't reach us and it is an emergency going on at the property or an urgent situation, so if you can't reach the team on the after hours number, then you must do this. And that becomes your protocol of, protection, to make sure that, everyone knows what to do. And it's not well, I didn't know what to do, so I just did this. And then the property managers are flapping their arms saying, well, now the owner's got this cost. What are we going to do? We can't. And it becomes that mishmash of everyone jumping in. It's like, well, I used to do this where I worked, or I would never have done that where I worked. We need to know exactly what we do for the company that we are representing.
Got it.
And this is why I find that there is a lot of misunderstanding, challenges, and mistakes. And as a result, risk and liability, because we haven't taken the time to create policy. You've got to take the time to create policy. And it's not oh, maybe we should do this. There really is preciseness in policy.
Hmm.
So take the time to understand policy and create it.
I
Use
don't
the
think a lot of property
time.
managers have policy defined. How many of you have policies defined in a separate document? All right. Two of you, three of you. Well, I see some sort ofs like this. Okay.
Yes,
Maybe half. Okay. Policies and procedures.
yes,
Some bought it from TREC or some other things. I'm sure, Joe, you have some policy materials as well.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Got
yeah.
it.
I do if anyone wants some help there. But I always say, even when you buy something, like
Yeah. You got to
the
tailor
kids,
it.
you still got to redefine it to what you want. And if you are having any even little niggles in your business, it comes back to your policy. Revisit your policy and say, like, how did that happen? And it's something I've got very good at as a property manager, because
Hmm.
my leader used to say to me, Joe, eat humble pie. Because I think, how did that happen? Like I'm so precise in what I do. And he'd say, eat humble pie. Obviously, there's something missing in the process. So it
Yeah.
taught me to go back and have a look at, like what went wrong there, how and why, and what do we need to do to make sure that never happens again. And it's why legislators are, like constantly looking at things and saying, well, like we need to change legislation or add in additional legislation so that that sort of thing doesn't happen again, or why there's, hearings on, why accidents happen. What do we need to do to prevent that from happening again? It's the same in our business. What do we need to do to prevent the impreciseness from happening again? And it normally comes back to policy adjustments, because legislation changes too. We go through a lot of change in legislation in property management. So your policy is something that, you should revisit often and just make sure it's working for you. So yeah, but if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy. Usually when I run webinars, I say everyone send me all your questions because normally a question you've got is one that others have,
Hmm.
and I can, mass reply to everyone. So, your questions are helpful to anyone who's on this, webinar. So I'm happy if you send them to Jason, and Jason can send them on
Could
to
throw some
me.
questions in the
Yeah.
chat right now if you'd like to. So, I mean, a key takeaway: legislation is not the same as policy. So you can't just go, well, this is the state law, because that can be interpreted, and that's why lawyers exist. And so you need to define your policies that are within your margin of risk and what you feel comfortable dealing with owners between the laws and your owners, kind of, and tenants. And then the policies, they help to create and guide the processes, but it sounds like policy really needs to be decided first because it really dictates what the procedures and processes will end up being.
Exactly. Yeah. Policy and say it's your foundation. So just see it as your foundation. It's the biggest cog in your business. So it's the cog that moves all the other cogs as you expand out.
All right. Did I prevent you from going to the next slide?
No, we're ready now.
Okay.
So just to understand policy, so there's 7 specifics around policy.
Mm.
So is to be specific, is to be clear, is to be uniform or consistent, appropriate, simple, inclusive, and stable. So, and I'm happy to send all of this out after the webinar, Jason. So, if they want to understand what do we need to look at in understanding policy. And what I want to do in this webinar or podcast webinar
Mhm.
um, is to is to maybe kind of like focus a little bit on a tenancy renewal and what might be included in creating the process around a tenancy renewal. So first of all, what's the objective of a tenancy renewal? The objective is to get the highest possible rent, to mitigate vacancy, to mitigate risk, the best possible, sorry, I'm just going to move my thing. There we are. Mitigate risk, the best possible resident for the highest possible rent and the most appropriate term. Now, it's not just we're going to sign everyone for 12 months. We might have areas where there's a development going on or development about to start or new infrastructure coming, or we might even have within our business an imbalance of when renewals are due. I like to see a nice balance of renewals across the 12-month period, because what that does is it balances productivity and it balances risk as well. So, that's the objective when we are looking at tenancy renewals. We don't want to just renew for the sake of it. We want to renew because, they are the best tenant for that property. And that becomes our promise to the clients. We then have a process and timelines. So it might be, depending on your area, that 3 months prior to the expiry of the tenancy term, we start the process of looking at the renewals. We prepare a report in the 3rd week of the month prior to 3 months. So this is where you can have your admin team or support team or your property managers saying that in the 3rd week of the 3 months prior is when you print the reports and we start to look at what tenancies are due for renewal in that 3 months forward. So we've got a precise time of actually starting the process. Now that's important because not all lease renewals are due at the same time. They are spread out across a 30 or 31-day period. So that in the 3rd week prior to the 3 months, then gives the team the ability to say the ones at the start of the month are the ones that we start with, not the ones at the end of the month. So we start to then put, a timeline around what we do. And then we say, depending on, what your legislation is, I've based this on Brisbane, that we finalised 2 months and 1 week prior to expiry. So we've got absolute precision around that. Now, the reason why in Queensland or Brisbane, the city where I am, is because if the owner has decided I'm not going to renew the lease, or the tenants are not signing the offer to renew, the owner has to give the tenants 2 months notice to vacate. So that means we've got to be at the forefront of making a decision because the tenant's not signing the offer to renew, that we then are the ones to issue a termination. And that issuing a termination then triggers a decision with the tenants to say, oh no, we were going to renew, so we'll sign it now. And if they weren't going to renew, then it gives the owner the maximum time to then, secure another tenant. So we get the tenant ready, advertise it, and we know we've got someone in there ready to go within what our policy is of we want 3 days in between tenant move out, tenant move in. And that's a promise we've made to the owners, with the exception of if the market stalls, then this is what we do. And we can't reach that, promise of 3 days. So any questions on that as an example?
It makes sense.
Yeah. So that becomes our practice. That is our practice within the policy, how we do it. We then say to the team, what we do is, before we call the owner, we want to review the owner's notes and intentions. Has the owner advised us in all of our communication leading up to this, or when they first engaged us to manage their property, that their intention is to move back into the property or to sell the property or to move family into the property, whatever it might be, at this time, or buy another rental property around this time. So we need to know what are the owner's intentions. We need to review the notes, not for the team to say, I've never met this owner before. This is the first time I've ever, spoken to them. I don't know what they want. We should have all of this in our notes. That is part of the policy of the company, that all notes are recorded in whatever system you use. We review the residents' history and conversations. When we've been at the property, when we've communicated with the resident via email or via phone, have they said anything about living in the property? Have they said anything that, they really love the property, but with winter approaching, they're finding that it's just too cold, or with summer approaching, it's too hot, or with the infrastructure that's being built in the area is becoming very congested. So we need to understand what's going on so we can have those discussions with the owner, or have they said that, their intention is to move. Then we review the property reports. So most of us do in-residence inspections or routine inspections. Oh, excuse me.
Bless you.
And through those reports, we get a general idea of the care of the property by the resident, and, are they worthy of being offered a renewal, or are they not abiding by the terms and conditions of their lease, or is there concerns that we've actually articulated to the owner that have been addressed, that when we call the owner to discuss renewal of the tenant, we need to be at the forefront of that, not to be saying, oh, I didn't know that this tenant, breached several times. So it becomes part of your policy that the team need to review what's going on. We prepare a CMA so that we can do, the market analysis on what the rent should be, not a guesstimate of let's increase it by $50 a month. That seems fair. Fair is what the market determines. Fair is not what the tenant can afford. It's what the market determines. So, if the tenants want to live in that style of property in that area, then the market is determining what the rent will be, not you as the agent. The market determines it. If the tenants can't afford it, or, they say that the rent is too high, then that market analysis needs to be so precise that, say, well, that's what the rent is for this property. If you were to move out of this property and into another property, that's the rent you'll be paying. And here's the market comparison for your property. You would be paying that rent. We also need to know market happenings, what's going on, as I said, with infrastructure, and development that's planned for the area. And that can also impact on the properties. So, I had an example, one of the last tenancy renewals I ever did as a property manager. I'd just done an inspection on the property, and the tenants had advised me that they loved living in the property, but with summer approaching, they found that the upstairs was just too hot where the bedrooms were. Um, and downstairs was great because they had air conditioning, but not upstairs. Now, I also knew that 10 minutes down the highway, there was beautiful new 3-bedroom apartments about to hit the market. Um, and there was, I think, about 50 odd of these new apartments that were going to come online around the time that this renewal was due. So when I was doing the renewal, I knew that if these tenants left the property, one, the owner would most likely have extended vacancy, and two, they'd probably get less rent than what they're getting at the moment because they were in competition with all of the new ones about to hit the market. So when I called the owner to discuss the renewal, what I discussed with him was, like in view of all this information, why don't you install an air conditioner upstairs? As a result, you can get another $20 a week. Your air conditioner is tax deductible, and your tenants will most likely stay on at the property because they love it. Now, that is their intentions. When I'm discussing with the owner, I don't know exactly what they want to do, but it was an option for the owner to kind of like keep the tenants there, not have vacancy, so mitigate vacancy, mitigate risk, and to have the rent increase instead of it falling because of these new properties. The owner liked that idea. The proviso was that the rent did not go up until the air conditioner was installed and working. So when I called the tenants, they loved the idea. And as a result, the tenants stayed on. They paid $20 a week more, which this is back in 1999. So $20 a week, $80 a month, quite, an increase still. And everyone was happy. There was no vacancy. We didn't lose the management. We didn't have, vacant properties, so no management fees. Everyone won as a result of that because I knew the market happenings. I also listened to what the tenant was telling me when I visited the property. So all of that information then becomes what we call the process. That's the process around tenancy renewal. It's not slapdash. It's not just, they're good tenants. If the owner loses them, then then the property will be vacant. He's got let fees and all of these things. It becomes a process, and it becomes very clear information that we articulate to both the owner and the resident. So we can get everyone on the same page. Whatever decision is made, it's made because of their wants and needs. And the owner understands, the tenant understands why rent goes up. Recommendations to the owner, we become very confident. So the team is confident in advising whether the resident is suitable for renewing or a suggestion for removal. I find that a lot of property managers are just reluctant to advise the owner to remove the tenant. It's like, what do you want us to do? It's like, we must give advice. So I always say we provide so that they can decide. And when we provide information, the owner is then very confident and very comfortable with giving us instruction. When we don't provide enough information, that's when they're kind of like backing off. I don't know what to do. I'm fearful of a vacant property. I don't want all the fees for, bringing in a new tenant. They think about fees instead of what's the best result for me. They focus on cost and not the, like what's the actual net return for me? What's the best possible outcome? We also need to know the rental potential and the tenancy terms. So this becomes policy when we talk to the team, and that's the principles, the guiding principles around how we actually determine the advice that we're about to give the owner and the tenants actually. Then we have the owner discussion. So it becomes policy that we call the owner. These are our recommendations. what would you like us to do? These are the actions that we will take. Now, if we don't know what the tenants' intentions are, we let them know. We don't know what the tenants' intentions are. So we will go back to the tenants and offer what you are asking us to do. Or the tenants have said in the past that they're happy there, but we never know until we make this offer. Things change, so we will advise you on what the tenants decide to do. We will also, if the tenants don't renew, by this date, we will then trigger a termination on the tenancy. Now, if the tenants leave because of our termination notice, that means they were going to leave anyhow. So we are protecting your interests by giving you maximum time to actually market that property and bring in a new resident. So if we can't reach you, we will make that decision to terminate. So we don't have the owner then saying, oh, well, why did you terminate them? That becomes the if this, then that protocol. And then we email confirmation. So, a lot of companies do this backwards. It's email, what would you like us to do? Email is always about confirming. So I recommend you always have that in your policy, is that you have that direct communication with your clients, then email to confirm, thank you for those instructions. This is what we are now doing. It's not, is that correct? Do you agree with what we're now doing? We are saying we are now taking this action. So the ball is in their court, and they're if they think no, that's not what I said, they can come back to you and say, actually, do you mind just doing this first? Or, I'd like you to do this. So we've actually confirmed we are taking this instruction. That becomes your politeness in what we do. So can you see how this is all, building into a process around a task that we do? Now, no instructions. So again, in the absence of owner's instructions, under a management agreement says we must act in their best interest and in accordance with prior discussions and advice on intentions. We have a duty of care and a responsibility to understand what the management agreement states, and that says act in their best interest. So that becomes your protocol. So you say to the team, well, the owner knows that, you can't get a hold of them. The tenants have not signed, issue a termination notice. So we trigger what the tenants are intending to do. So the phone call becomes a renewal offer or removal notification. It's about the terms of offer, the timeline for completion, and actions if not signed. So we are discussing all of that with the owner when we call them. They know what we're about to do. We've told them when we first signed the management agreement, but we've now reminded them this is what we will be doing. Everyone feels confident knowing what's going to happen. And I call this making moments magical. So call the resident to congratulate and welcome back for further term when it's all finished, and send a link to request a rating testimonial. This is how we boost the confidence of the team. That's like, we followed policy, and we did things. This is how we boost the confidence of the owners and the residents, and like, we become that Disney of property management, where we can create magic moments and not tragic moments, because I see too many tragic moments in property management. So, then for the owner, we call the owner, congratulate them, share the details of the renewal. We increase the rent. You got an increase in a percentage of, which is, this much more every month or annually. In comparison to the market, you're getting 2% better than the market. The term, we've actually taken you into a term that works better for your property with what's going on. Your new expiry date is this. And we would love for you to give us a testimony on what we've done. That's the moment where we created the magic, because we abided by our policy. Everyone cooperated with us, and everyone feels happy. So we've reinforced in their mind, we just, worked for the fees that you pay us for our service, and we've reinforced that you're happy. So the outcome, we've gone from the objective of the task of tenancy renewal to the outcome. And I always say I give 5 heart service. For everyone that knows me, my sign off is purple love. So I don't look at 5 star, I look at 5 heart service. And what we've created in our 5 heart service is cooperation, because everyone knows what to expect. Team, rental owner, resident. We've created the trust, we've created respect, we've created loyalty, and as a result, recommendation. It's how you grow your brand as a result. So we have brand love, not individual love. If you have individual love of a property manager, that's when we fear losing a team member more than we fear losing a client, and kind of like the tables turn in the wrong direction. So 5 heart service or 5 star service, or whatever it is for you. I've got a company and their name is Grow and Co, and it's all about the roots in the ground. We call it 5 leaf service for them. So whatever your 5 star rating is, make sure that every task you do is founded in the policy, so you can create the process around it and the foundations, or the cornerstones around it, to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. So any questions before I kind of like go into what it looks like designing a workflow? No? Silence, silence everywhere? No? Okay. So I'll work straight into designing a workflow. Now, as I said at the start of my presentation, I don't expect for anyone to walk away from this and think I can now, design a workflow. What you'll be able to do is, know the basis of all the steps involved in the workflow. But workflows are very complex, and you create the simplicity out of the complexity. And they're also very intuitive. So you can create workflows that are intuitive because of not so much AI, just the ability of the workflow. We can build AI into it, as your workflows become better and better. But it takes away that intuition that we think we have on our business, because we monitor, the stress levels of the team, or, we ask the team, how are you going on this? In my belief, we should never ask the team what's happening or how you're going. We should let them know ourselves, because of the information, the data we have at hand on workflows, on productivity, on performance, that we can share with them. This is what's going on with the business. Your arrears are sitting at this. I need you to do this to bring those arrears down. Your lease renewals need to be finished by today before you go back. So we're the ones that are advising in a very leadership, coaching, nurturing kind of way, instead of an authoritarian kind of way, which is where you hear teams say, I don't want to be micromanaged. I'm sorry, anyone who's got a business, you have to micromanage the business. You have to micromanage every element of every task that goes on. But, when a team member says, I don't want to be micromanaged, to me, that's an excuse for, I don't want accountability. So there must be accountability, and accountability is a positive thing for the team, because accountability helps them and you to know we're on task with everything, we're on time with everything, and we're good. And one thing I want you to understand in property management is we never have everything done. If I have a property manager who says I've got no work to do, I think, Houston, we've got a problem. We are up to date with everything. We can never sit there and say everything's done. Everything is ongoing. When we've got a property manager who says, I'm not going home until everything is done. And when I went home last night, everything was done. I've got no tasks that I need to complete. It's like, no, property management is ongoing. So, what you want to hear them say is, I'm up to date with everything I need to be up to date with. So tenancy renewals, again, we look at that. Tenancy renewals, if we start 3 months out, 2 months out, whatever your timing is, those tenancy renewals are due over a 30 or 31-day period. And all steps are going to be due at different times in those tenancy renewals. It might be 5, it might be 20, it might be more that we're working on. But every one of those renewals is up to date at the point that they need to be up to on that particular day. So when we design a workflow, every step can be assigned to a team role. Now, a team role is an individual. You are employed as a property manager who is responsible for a portfolio of properties, meaning that you are managing every element of that property and that resident. Or it could be you are employed as a leasing consultant who is responsible for one, advertising properties, scheduling open homes, processing applications, inducting tenants into the property. So whatever their role is, that becomes their team role within a flow. And they are then assigned to do the task or activity within a step. And I'll show you what steps are in a moment. I'm going to show you an example of a flow. So when designing a step, what you need to consider is who the step is going to be assigned to and what the deadline is for that step. So we now know that, we say if we start a tenancy renewal, we start at 3 months out, and by 2 months, we have a finalisation to that, 2 months before the expiry of that tenancy renewal. But then every action and step involved along the way has their own timeline, because when we're doing a tenancy renewal, we're going to do a lot of work up front and then it stops. And we know when it stops, it's stopped at the right place, and we don't do anything for potentially another 3 weeks, 4 weeks. But it's sitting there, it is not out of date. It's exactly where it needs to be, and it's going to stay there. It's going to stay in the dashboard. The step considerations are, when you're, and this is just to give you thought process around it. So the team leader or business owner needs to consider what needs to be included in each step. So what do you need as a supervisor to overview and track the process? So, when we've got automated workflows, we've got the ability to, sorry, I think it's almost morning coffee time. We've got the ability to nudge or reassign, because what happens is team can be away. They might be sick, and we've got things that need to be done that day. They might be on vacation, or they might have left the company, or they might have moved to another role. So we've got the ability to say we know exactly where we're up to on every task that we're doing. And the supervisor or team leader then has that opportunity to redirect that action or step to the most relevant member of the team. So we deliver on our promise and stay within policy guidelines on getting the job done when it should be done. So critical dates for tasks and each step along the way, that takes a lot of thought. And as you're designing the workflow, whatever you design, make sure that, as you do it, because I do workflows for companies that I consult to, and I make adjustments in timelines until we've got it, absolute. So don't ever think it doesn't work. You make adjustments until it does work. It's like someone who's writing music, and they have wrong notes in the music, and it's not until they're playing it, it's like, ugh, that didn't sound good. And they'll, write another note in the music. It's like sounding better, but, like, let's, make something else there. And it's the same in creating a workflow. It's got to be very rhythmic, and it becomes something that becomes the beat of the business. So if it's out of tune, then go in and just adjust. Important names and addresses. Now, all we're needing, think of your workflow as a checklist, a paper checklist. And when we have a paper checklist, all we put in that paper checklist was the name of the owner, the resident, the address of the property, and maybe, when a lease was expiring or starting, or things like that. So a lot of companies get caught up in the fact, does it integrate with my software, whatever I might use, Appfolio, Yardi, Rent Manager? They're caught up in the fact it's like, I don't want a separate workflow that's not integrated with my, property management system that I use or software that I use. Don't get caught up in that, because it is really just limited data that you're putting in the workflow to identify, who we're doing this task for or what property we're doing the task for. Eventually there will be integration, but right now just think of it as that separate checklist and, just limited information. You need to think about compliance issues and also information you need to know when monitoring, or to know what critical things are completed. So a good example of this, and something that I see is, and I see this so often when I go into companies, is a management agreement or a tenancy agreement might have been signed by, the person who is asking us to manage their property, or the resident who's moving into the property. But when it comes back to the office, what I'm seeing is they're missing that step of someone within the agency signing the agreement. There is no signature by the agency. It gets forgotten because there is no precise step in their workflow. So and it really is amazing. I'm shocked every time I see it, but it's because they think it's not important enough to put in a checklist. It's very important, because if you don't have a fully completed management agreement, then it's not legal and binding. It means the clients haven't been given a copy of a fully completed management agreement or tenancy contract. So it's very important. Little key things are not, incidental. They're very important part of the flow. So what to include to help each team member in their role and know what is required under each step. So these are just guidelines. There's checklists or subtasks. So, it might be that prepare the tenancy agreement. Is there any special conditions? Yes. What are the special conditions? So we know we've got those special conditions in there, like the lease renewal might be subject to the installation of air conditioning. So all of those little things that can happen, confirmation of important tasks and activities, the example I just gave, questions to assist with new pathways. So typically when we create a workflow for a lease renewal, for example, we'll say, is this lease fixed term tenancy or periodic? And then if it's periodic, we go into a different pathway, because a lot of property managers misunderstand the fact that even though we're renewing for a periodic term, we are still renewing that lease, aren't we? Even if it's periodic, we need to look at that and say, all right, the owner wants to keep them on periodic, which, that might be against company policy, but for this particular owner, there are circumstances that we say, if this then that, we are allowing them on periodic. However, what we have is, we don't ever want that periodic to fall through the cracks and the rent never be reviewed or potentially increased every 12 months or so. So we include in our renewals any periodics that then we renew by keeping it on periodic but increasing the rent, and then trigger a date in 12 months time to review and potentially increase the rent again. So that renewal then becomes, if it is periodic, then potentially the period of notice to increase rent is different to the period of notice to increase rent if it is a fixed term tenancy. Or if we're going to terminate, the period of notice on periodic is different to the period of notice on fixed term. So you can see why we need all of these different elements within a workflow. So the workflow then determines the questions, responses, and actions that we need to do within the workflow. It doesn't become like, like I didn't know you had to do that, or I didn't think that was important, or I've never done it that way. To-do lists and tagging, we can tag certain things within a workflow, certain team within a workflow, document attachment if required. So in a tenancy renewal, a lot of the workflows I've created is I give the responsibility to the team leader or business owner to approve of the recommendations before the property manager can go to the rental owner to say, these are the recommendations that we make. So the business owner then goes through a series of, I'm going to look at the CMA. So the CMA is attached to the workflow. And then they can look at it and say, I agree with the recommendations. I agree that this tenant is worthy of an offer to renew the property. And then they can approve, and it goes back to the portfolio manager or whoever's doing the lease renewal to say, I'm approving for you to then make these recommendations to the owner, or I disapprove. I want you to rethink the recommended rent, or I can see that this tenant has had numerous breaches. So why are we offering a renewal? So it becomes, part of your process. The dollar amounts, including calculations. So when it becomes a security deposit, disbursement, for example, we can see all the calculations in the workflow. We've also got triggers there. Have you checked, is there any outstanding invoices? Are we waiting on invoices to be returned because we had to, organize extra cleaning or gardening or maintenance? Because at the start of the workflow, it says, we've had to organize gardening, cleaning, maintenance. So then it comes in at the end of the workflow to say, we are now waiting on these invoices before you accidentally release the security deposit. So we've got all of these methods of saying nothing is going to happen by accident, or I wasn't here when we started that security deposit disbursement, so I didn't know that we were waiting on those things. Because just because one person starts it doesn't mean that one person is going to finish it. We all know that there's team movement. The conditional questions, reminders, instructions. You can even put in multimedia aids. So when you're bringing in, new team, you can have links in there that link to your policy, that link to video instructions, so that, your workflows become the follow the bouncing ball. And if you don't understand how we actually do that, here's a link on a video instruction, or the actual, step in our policy about that particular action or instruction. Links to other resources, key dates, even emails. So you can put in your workflows. At this point, we've got a standard email that goes out to, whoever it is that we're dealing with in that workflow. And then, of course, everything we do in property management doesn't always end in, what we say, when we do a lease renewal, it doesn't always end in a lease renewal. It can then end in a vacate. So it's going to link to a vacate flow. And a vacate flow then links to an application processing flow. A vacate flow can then link to this owner is now selling this property. So it links to the owner is selling the property, which becomes a termination of management as well. So there's multiple things that are happening that these flows all link to. So we know that, like if it has a link to an owner selling, then we're also doing the termination when it sells, and we're doing what's required in that, owner selling. Now, the owner selling can link to an owner who is going to be an owner occupier. It can link to someone who's buying it as an investment. It can link to someone who's buying it as an investment after they've done a lot of refurbishment and regeneration or rejuvenation of the property. So all of the flows then link. So it's not like, like we didn't know the owner was selling. We didn't know that we had to do that. And it's very important because, as I said at the start, property management is just like ongoing. Every flow usually leads to something else, or an absolute, end to that task. So the dashboard on workflows is key. That's where you get that at a glance data to assist with, reassignment, to assist with nudging. I always say that, like you do a daily wrap, and at 3 o'clock, the business leader can go in and say, like these things need to be done before the team go home. So I'm going to give this team member a nudge. I can write a comment in their workflow to say, please do this or complete this. Or I can reassign it because this person has been delayed or they've gone home sick, or, they're no longer with us. So what it leads to is on-time task, action and step management, management of task productivity, and analysis and evidence of the tasking per property. So if we've got an owner who says, I don't know why I'm paying you, we can actually bring up in the dashboard every task that we've completed for the owner. Or we can see that, like if that owner is complaining and saying, you haven't finished this, we can actually bring it up and say, we are still working on that, and we are up to this point, which we're exactly on time with it. So it removes doubt. And where there's doubt, there's fear, and there's, accusation and justification. So it removes all of that. We have task evidence. So there is a PDF of every task, and that evidence is fantastic for, if you do end up in court, for a hearing, or you need proof of work completed, because every action is time stamped, it's date stamped, and it's person stamped. And what we can do is we can then marry that up to the information that is logged into whatever software you're using, because we can see that it was actually done. This is where we get accountability and the proof of evidence. So, like to create it, this is just an example of here's our, policy and process in doing fixed term tenancies. Here's a book. This is one I've created. And this is how we created the master flows that we have in Floso. So here's all the steps and what we need to do. It's all documented. Here is the old, I call them track mates. It's checklist. This is the old paper checklist, and minimal stuff there that this floats around the office and it gets lost on desks and no one knows where it's up to. And especially if you use, virtual assistants or remote team, like paper checklists just don't jive anymore. You can't use paper checklists if your team are in different locations. But this is, the just the limited amount of information that we could have in a checklist. So when we create workflows, think of this: workflows are different to checklists. Workflows are like a satellite navigation system. Treat them like that. Checklists are like the signposts that we see along the road. That's the difference. So think differently when creating your automated workflow. It is very, very clever and very intuitive. Don't think it doesn't work. Don't think it's more work, because the more you use it, the more you'll see that your productivity increases, performance is better, and you are delivering on all of the, promises, within your business. So in mapping your workflow, get started on this. Review your current checklist, add every action and step. Call the owner, send an email to the owner. Call the resident, send an email to the resident. Log what time that was done, all those things. Prepare the tenancy renewal. Was a tenancy renewal sent via email or through the online portal? Was it an electronic? All of that. So we need to know. Identify in detail if it is an admin task or a property management skill level task. And that is really important, because in every task, I do a lot of task analysis, and in every task that we do in property management, so a task is a tenancy renewal, a vacating a tenant, processing an application. Every task, at least 60% is administration. Now, you want to be able to assign the administrative task to someone who is at that skill level and pay level, or in training to become a property manager. Don't bog the property management team or yourself down in the admin. And this is how you identify and then assign. Calculate the timeline and step for ultimate completion. So every little step, once we've got all the steps, I need this done within 10 minutes of the task starting. I need this step done within 20 minutes of that step being done. So ultimately, at the end, this step is going to take 1 month or this task is going to take 1 month. We've allowed 1 month for it to complete. Redefine the order of activity. Now, what we find with workflows is a lot of the team will say, we don't do it that way. We don't do it in that order. workflows actually help us to have a very logical order of how we do things. But in having said that, there might be a time when if you put for lease signs up at properties, we've already put the for lease sign up because we happen to be out there doing something. So we can put in comments that for lease sign was erected on this date. So when we actually get to that part in the workflow, we tick it as it being done, or we mark it as being done, but we've also got in the comments why we actually did it, earlier. Pinpoint decision junctures, and that's what we call destination mapping. So, for instance, when we're doing a tenancy renewal, we do that upfront analysis and investigation. And then we say, you know what, this tenant has breached so many times, their rent is always late. We are not going to offer or recommend a renewal. So that workflow then becomes vacate and it's done. Whereas if we are offering a renewal, we go through certain steps, and then we could get to the renewal where they haven't come back to us. So we terminate, or they decide that no, we're not going to accept the offer. So it's a termination, or it could go right through to the end. So they're the sort of things that are decision points in a workflow. Distinguish opportunities for automation emails, identify potential links to resources and documents, and then determine links to next flow. So have a look at, all of those things and map it out. Get your big, whiteboard, big, and look at it, there. Make a real visual of it. So task timelines, in understanding task timelines, every task, this is what I love about property management, is we can create timelines on everything that we do. So, your policy might be that within 24 hours of receiving an application, it needs to be fully processed. So it goes to the owner for recommendation of accept or reject. And that is a fully completed application with supporting documents and everything they need. Or a property must be listed within 24 hours of intention to vacate. The maintenance is processed at the same time every day. So if you've got a policy for maintenance, all maintenance must be reported in writing through the portal, with the exception of urgent or emergency maintenance that must be called through. So your office policy is, we know that anything that is sitting in the portal is just routine standard maintenance. There is no need to look at that maintenance, at different times during the day. You can say to your team at 2 o'clock every day, I want you to process any maintenance that's come through within the last 24 hours. That way we've got the focused tasking, and we know that every 24 hours that we are processing that maintenance, and, assigning it to the relevant vendor. And then, of course, we've got the legislated timelines for pay or quit, notice to vacate, and things like that. Now, this is a tenancy renewal workflow. So we've got master workflows in property management in Flusos to assist with, when you are creating your own workflow, to look at this. I always encourage any users to use the master workflows that we've created, use them over and over, just practicing. And then from that, you can determine the changes that you want to make, or the adjustments. Now, what I find in the beginning when we launched Flusos is everyone wanted it changed dramatically. And then they'd come back and say it's not working. And what they'd want is they'd say it's missing this or it's missing that. And what it's missing is what they pulled out in the beginning because they didn't understand automated workflows. And that's why I say practice, practice, practice with the workflow. Get to know it, get to know how intuitive it is, and get to know how it creates precision in what you're doing within that task. And then you have that confidence and the knowledge to make the slight adjustments to make sure that it is then in line with your policy, your promise, and your team structure, because team structures are different within every company. Team structures are about the roles, responsibilities. So that all becomes part of your workflow as well. So that's an entire workflow, and you can see within it, the different decision points. This one is going to go from here all the way through to we're vacating the tenant and then we finish it. This one is, like discussing with the owner about the, whether they want to offer renewal, and they're not going to, so we're going to then terminate and finish. And this one is where we've offered a renewal, they haven't accepted, we're going to vacate and finish. Whereas this one is we've gone all the way through to renewal. And that includes is if we charge fees for that service, we've built it into the workflow to make sure that we charge the fees. So this is a little kind of like snapshot of the workflow I just shared, and you can see where every step can be assigned to a different role within the team. So this is a portfolio manager, team leader, administration assistant, and just a little bit more of a close-up of the juncture in this particular workflow. And there again, this is another snapshot of that area, just showing where we're going to like move, the owner's moving or selling, no, yes, and the different pathways that the workflows can take. So in a paper checklist, we don't have that opportunity, do we? It's kind of like it's just like these are the steps, and it doesn't give us that opportunity. It really doesn't give us the opportunity to sit and know that we are sitting on a particular action or step, and the timeline is correct. You'll be like, oh no, like what happened to that checklist that I was doing on a renewal? I should have actually sent out the notice yesterday. So this gives us all the information that we need. Now, what I'm showing here is, you can see here I've got a highlighted box. This highlighted box is what is within that step. So within that step is all actions and activities that we do. Whoops, jumping ahead there. So this is where we're saying at this particular step, the portfolio manager is assigned to call the property owner to discuss a renewal offering, email the property owner, they say, yes, it's done. And then they can say, is a tenancy being offered or the renewal being offered to the owner? Now that's a drop down. This is obviously a snapshot, but that's a drop down. It says yes, no. So if it's yes, it's going to go off in one direction. If it's no, it's going to go into a direction of we're going to do a vacate. And then it's calling the tenants to advise, your lease is due for renewal, the owner is offering you a renewal, or the owner will not be offering you a renewal. So we're just letting you know, we'll be sending a termination notice. And it's all marked there. And what we're doing is we're making sure that we're keeping up the level of communication, but also sending out notices as and when required. This you can see is I've now jumped forward. This is administration. So within that blue box, here's the actions and activities within that blue box. Now, when the team tick this off, whoever's responsible for it, if they don't mark something as being done, they'll get a little red box pop up to say, you haven't completed that step. So go back and do it. So no step can be missed in actually doing it. Now, this screenshot is what happens when we are completing a flow. So this is what the team will see when they're going through and saying, complete the following. Advise property owner to confirm renewal can be viewed in the portal. Advise tenant to confirm renewal can be viewed in their portal. Save signed tenant's renewal to tenant file. So whatever it is you're doing there, this will be marked. And what it's doing is, as this step is done, it now completes. This is your growing completion of a checklist that you can see this is all completed. Now, this is saying a few seconds ago. This is like as time goes on, that changes to a few minutes ago. It changes to exact date and time and person. So this just keeps changing.
So it
If I
shows the
scroll,
history. Hey, Joe,
yes,
we are over time. So
okay.
how can people get a hold of or learn more about Flusos, in which you have a lot of these processes built out?
Yes.
And how can they get in touch with you?
Okay. What I'll do is I'll just flick, and sorry, I've gone over time. But they can go to, you can scan this while I've got it up, and go to Flusos, um, book a demo. Now, I would say, like book a demo and say that you've been on this webinar. And I have also asked Stace to give everyone a practice environment,
Hmm.
because I like people to go in there and practice, and get comfortable with it, and allow yourself to adjust to automated workflows, because it is different thinking. Just think of what I said, that workflows are like a satellite navigation. Your checklists are like signposts along the road. And this becomes, very intuitive in your business. So go in there, book a demo. Stace, my husband, will be the one that guides you through that. Reach out to me as well. Oh, I always like to finish with something Disney says. So Disney says, to the youngsters of today, I say, believe in the future. The world is getting better. There's still plenty of opportunity. Why would you believe it? When I was a kid, I thought it was already too late for me to make good at anything. Now, he wrote that, 60 odd years ago, longer. And we live in a world where it keeps evolving. Property management is evolving. Workflows is our next evolution. And we must step up to understanding workflows. So Disney, he had it. He knew what was going on. But for anyone who wants to contact me, if they've got questions, and I can share those questions with Jason so everyone gets a response, please reach out to me. And, I'm always happy to assist and help you to get an understanding around workflows.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. So we use the Fluso software internally. We had it branded as DoorGrow Flow for a while, and we use it internally as a team. My team loves it. It's super intuitive because it's these visual workflows. They can understand what the process is doing, where they're going in it, what the outcomes can be. And then it's very easy for my team to edit and update processes. Sometimes it's just drag and drop and moving stuff around or rearranging orders. And so even Sarah, my operator and wife, who does not like software, like she thinks technology's out to get her, she loves working in this tool and is the one that's always making changes and editing it. And so it makes it really easy for the team. Whereas most systems out there are really just checklist based systems. They're very linear and they have a fundamental flaw um, that people will just check stuff off without accountability, and it's just too linear. And so, like Joe was showing, processes can split and they can merge back together, and that's more connected to reality and how we run our businesses. Things happen concurrently. Not everything's just a linear checklist that can be followed. And that's really true of property management. And so I really think this is the best process software that's available for property managers. So highly recommend you check it out. We used to use Process Street, which I think Lead Simple is a CRM and a clone of Process Street. And we used to use Process Street internally, which is more checklist. But the problem was I had to be the one to change and fix every complicated process. Nobody could understand this crazy thing that I built with logic and steps and whatever. And so that was really frustrating. And now with this tool, I don't do any of the processes. My team handle all of it. So I don't have to, which is amazing because I'm the resident nerd. So, and I did a lot of research before I came across something like this. And Joe was the one that helped me figure it out. So, so reach out to Joe and hopefully, Joe, you get some people reaching out to you. And until next time, everybody, to our mutual growth, say thanks to Joe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.